All right, so without further delay, we're just going to very quickly move on to our next session because I'm just conscious of that we're running behind. So I'd like to invite Mike Ward up to the stage. Now, hopefully Mike was having a few technical issues earlier, but hopefully he has resolved these. So Mike's the head of IT at South Hams District Council and West Devon Borough Council, and he's going to talk a bit around a major organisational change and how we implement those changes across the organisation. So, right, Mike, it's good to go now, Mike. We've managed to resolve any issues.
Yeah,
so I'll hand over to you.
From Windows.
So I'll be here in the background if you need any help with anything, all right?
Okay, that's great, thanks. So yeah, I'm Mike Ward, head of IT at Southampton West Devon Councils. I've been that post for about 6 years now. We're 2 local authorities, 1 management structure, 1 service delivery structure, and so we just keep the finances and the politicians separate. I'm here today because Andy Sanford asked me to come and come and talk to you about our the adventures we had, if you like, of the first time we attempted a transformation about 6 years ago, because it was pioneering for local authorities, and the experience was quite remarkable. And it's a story of how we restructured to reduce our the headcount of the organisation by 25%, how we migrated our back office systems, CRM at the same time, how we built 150 processes, captured knowledge from officers and put it into workflow. We remodeled the building into agile workspaces and hot desks, and achieved a fair degree of cultural change. I've spoken about this before, but I think I'll do it a little bit different this time, because I'll talk about what we did and why we did it. But then I'll add in what actually happened, and talk about the lessons we learned and how we put those lessons into practice for our second sort of platform migration and transformation. And so all these are my personal observations and experiences of having gone through that process. So the why did we do it? And the why is quite important, and you'll see that later. But back in 2014, we had a program, and it was all about saving money. We had predicted £4.7 million budget per year budget gap, and so the only motive for this reorganisation was about saving money. So what we did was we adopted a new operating model. We took away all the silos, all the departments. We just grouped the organisation effectively into 3 or 4 roles. You were a specialist in a community of practice. You were case management, where the majority of the work was done through workflow, or you were service processing, which was, say, service desk or contact centre. We restructured the people into these new roles and made most roles agile, with office space given over to hot desking with a 6:10 ratio of desks to officers. The emphasis was on behaviours and attitudes of the staff, and the services were meant to be designed around customers. We were going to make up for the 25% loss of our headcount by having efficient business processes based on the greater use of IT. And the point of building the workflow was to capture the business knowledge of officers as they were either repurposed, if you like, or some left the organisation. And the idea was, if we made the workflow really good, anyone could do anybody's job. So the organisation became silo-less, rather flat. Specialists were left to do the work that they were paid to do, so planners could make planning decisions, for example, rather than answer phones. The bulk of the work was done by the case management layer, only popping out of the workflow to a specialist and back in again as and when that was required. We had an external triaging layer of mobile locality officers, And they again were multifunctional. They could be, observing fly tips or putting up planning notices, anything that was required out and about in the community. At this point, although I said earlier we were focusing services around the customers, we didn't actually do any community engagement. And the other thing of note at the time that struck a chord with me is that I remember the councillors being promised that we'd do all this and there would be no impact on the council's performance. So we had a number of themes. There was the building theme where we remodeled the workforce. So we had to remodel the building, hot desking areas, breakout areas. There were no offices. Everywhere was sort of an agile areas where anyone could touch down, and so even the executive directors didn't have offices, although we did have meeting rooms. The idea was that we had no paper. We had some modular meeting spaces, and there was an emphasis at the time on there was no eating at the desks and don't mess, because anybody could come along and use the desk after you. The technology stream was about capturing our business processes, building workflow. We were implementing a new CRM and case management platform, developing new web forms. We removed all the desk phones and went to Skype for business only. We gave everyone laptops and they could work from home. They could work from anywhere. Most of us were completely location agnostic. As long as the work was done, personally, I didn't care where it was done or when it was done, within the confines of delivering a service. And we implemented a new back office platform as well for planning, environmental health, and document management. The people strand, what I think is probably the most interesting. A lot of people find the technology a bit dull, really, but the people's quite a remarkable story, because everyone's work style changed. As I say, we were location agnostic. We were going to manage by performance, not by attendance. Appropriate customer service attitudes and behaviours were developed, and the mantra of work is a task and not a place was quite popular. Our people to be more flexible. We had the senior specialist staff, which were able to focus on areas that genuinely required expertise. And the idea was we were trying to shift the work forward towards the customer-facing side of the organisation, or you might say the cheaper side of the organisation. We aimed to have a workforce that was skilled and knowledgeable and empowered, with attitudes and behaviours that supported the model, and lots of self-service and automation would reduce the work. The technology side, we broke into 10 work streams of infrastructure, mobile, GIS, web portal, telephony, back office integration, back office systems migration, infrastructure, an IT refresh for our members, and a document image migration as well. The councillors or the members played a part, because our aim was to have paperless council meetings as well as a paperless office. So through a competitive tender, we chose a single supplier to provide all of our systems, because on the belief that if we had one supplier, we would reduce the integration difficulties, or so we thought. The aim was to support the technology was to support the new operating model that we were implementing, and we successfully migrated our data and implemented our processes. Lots of communication was done with staff, but it was never consultation. No one asked, there was no appetite to ask the staff what they needed. And, quite early on in the programme, they were feeling rather done too. So what really happened was, how did we get the new workforce into the new structure? Well, that was conceptually quite easy. We sacked everyone. And so every single role that was created, anyone in the organisation could apply for. There was no ring fencing. This included all of the director posts and executive directors, and if you didn't get a role in the new organisation, then you left. We did get a number of people that voluntarily left because they didn't have the appetite for the selection process or the new module or whatever. And I suppose, to be honest, to some extent, they did get rid of a certain amount of dead wood. So recruitment was based entirely on behaviours, no functional competencies. The idea behind that was that the officers were deemed to have the functional competencies, otherwise they wouldn't be working in the council in the first place. So all of the interviewing and selection process was on entirely based on behaviours. And the 6 behaviours that we measured people on were responsible, communicative, adaptable, cooperative, challenging, and customer focused. Now, it was an interesting journey because on the days when the jobs were announced in various areas, it was done in 3 phases. You know, but there's some people that were really good, didn't get a role, and were left the building on the day that was announced. And there were a number of incidents where, you know, people were actually in tears, and I'd never seen anything like it. And at the time, my lad was on a work experience at the council. And I had to try and explain to him, I said, really, grown-up work isn't like this. You never normally see people at work stressed, in tears, and the place in a somewhat sort of chaotic frame. So I think it did probably leave a bit of a scar on him. So there were some good points. We had a new senior management. And the good point about that was they hadn't got any of the baggage that the old management would have had regarding the restructure and the choice of the technology and so on. Because anybody could apply for any job, there were some people that we termed rising stars, and people whose talents had previously been unrecognised fitted into some more senior roles really, really well. And in fact, there were a couple of examples where officers on lower grades sort of leapfrogged the person above them. Which again didn't always go down too well, but you know, we got some very good people in place. What we did end up with was those of us that were left was a motivated workforce with a great team spirit, more of a Dunkirk spirit, I suppose, and who worked together really well. We did lose some people that were. I thought there was a number of good people left the organisation, which I didn't think we should have lost. And I think that was because of the selection process. Good people do bad behavioural interviews sometimes. And we did get a couple of anomalies where, for example, a person took a role on the service desk who'd previously worked in car parks. So she had a bit of a learning curve, but, you know, she really threw herself into it and is still with us, still on the service desk. In terms of the technology, most of the work streams worked very well. The infrastructure migration, Skype rollout. The software was a problem. Back office was implemented eventually, but never really met the staff expectations in terms of reliability and ease of use. Some functionality was never delivered. The integration was difficult, regardless of it being a single supplier. It hugely overran timescales for migration. Project plans were wildly optimistic. And then the solution was never popular because it was deemed to be clunky. So, as you can imagine, we had a lessons learned log that was quite considerable. And what we did at the end of the exercise, when we closed the program down, is we interviewed lots of stakeholders, technical officers, users, counsellors, senior leaders, business users. And we asked them questions such as, to what extent do you believe the supplier had shared a mutual understanding of the deliverables? How did you rate working with this supplier? Were there any surprising abnormal events that occurred during delivery? You know, how do you believe it had been solved or handled? To what extent do you believe the scope of the delivery was met? And looking 5 years into the future, how do you rate the supplier's products? And a lot of the scores in the spreadsheet that we constructed with these questions, with the number of officers, were quite often 0s, 1s, 2s out of 10. There were a few successes, but by and large, that was the level of dissatisfaction, if you like, with the solution. Some of the themes that emerged from our lessons learned, that we would never want to go through again, was the project plan. Despite our protestation at the time with the supplier, there was only allowed for one test and one live cut of data for the migrations. And my experience had shown it'll take 4 or 5, possibly 6 test cuts before you get it right. But of course, the project plans weren't negotiable in that sense, and of course the first cut of data didn't work. We did have to have a second cut and a third cut and a fourth cut, and it just kept pushing the project back and adding more expense from the supplier. And the lack of realism on the project plan became quite expensive because additional resources were brought in that we were charged additionally for. But I think by and large, the project managers of the supplier pretty much ignored the technical advice of my team. As far as the implementation goes, it was, getting the right technical resources is really important. Now, as a result of the selection process, ironically, we lost a number of people in IT as well. So not only did we have a massive program to implement, we got even fewer resources, and I resorted to getting contractors in. And, I could plug the gap from my end, but I don't think this, again, something I would always watch out for is whether the supplier gives the right technical resources. And, we ended up sometimes, because there were no technical resources available, a project manager would end up trying to do something technical in an area that they really didn't understand. So far as staff consultation went, there was a lack of involvement with the staff on for the solution. And as a result of that, they were always complaining, always unhappy. There was always a problem, and wow, I wish we could go back to the old system. This is rubbish, etc. And some of them, up until a year or so ago, were still complaining. There was no proper evaluation of the solution, I would say. With hindsight, it didn't meet the requirements that we'd set out. And the software change was never really embraced, and people were always critical of it. We also, I'm going to say we didn't involve the members. The organisation at the time were involved in terms of being told what we were going to do, but they weren't involved, if you see what I mean. They were almost done to as well, but they were just assured that there'd be no impact on services, which I'm sure you can all see was just ludicrous. The lessons we learned from the workflow, we did lots of business analysis, and we built some workflow, and because we were obsessed with capturing the knowledge from people so that anyone could do a particular job, we made the workflow really granular. And because of that, officers complained that they were selecting too many answers and answering too many yes/no questions, while we tried to cater for all the edge cases rather than just allowing people to learn the process. And I think we just created trying to create processes that anyone could do, but just made them far more difficult, and neglected to use the skills that the officers had. And we did an exercise and rewrote a number of the processes to remove that granularity. The level of risk and disruption was, as you can imagine, was quite immense. There was a lot of impact of service delivery. The risk to services because of staff departures was quite high, and service failure was, not uncommon. Particularly, I remember our land charges service didn't have a system for 3-4 weeks maybe. But the lesson I learned from it was for me, and it personally, was to not carry any of those risks, but I try to delegate risk upwards and never carry it, and share it, ownership of it, with as much of the organisation that I can, be it members or senior leaders, and just be honest and open about the things that might go wrong or will probably go wrong, rather than try and wing it. So back to the theme that Andy introduced on this, which was what happened after the consultants left. We had an organisation with barely enough resources to deliver services and a platform that didn't meet our requirements, some migration issues that still needed resolving and workflow that needed fixing. But the project was deemed a success. And that's because we met the why at the beginning. We saved money. The implementation was about 4.8 million. The annual savings were 3.8. We reduced our headcount by 110 people. And it took less than 2 years to pay back on the investment. And so if the appetite within the organisation is to tolerate disruption, then you can achieve what appears to be a pretty poor example of change management and actually achieve your aim. We have an organisation now that we can move quickly because we have very little departmental inertia. There are no barriers to rolling out new processes or forms. We can move resources around to match where the work is needed. Any spikes of work and demand in one area can be addressed from resources in another where maybe work is tailing off a little bit, and we can deploy processes quickly and easily. However, around about 5 years on from that implementation, so 2018, 2019, we started to think it was time for a new platform because we had saved the money and we had been relatively successful at our cultural change, but some of that was despite the technology rather than because of it. So what we thought we'd do then is to revisit our lessons learned log, do everything right this time in terms of getting a platform and involve as many people as we could. So second time around, I thought about a vision for a utopian future for the council and wrote a blueprint around it that touched everything. Website features, telephony integration, contact center queue management, how our customer record, how we create the single view of the customer. We wanted proper real-time reporting. We wanted reports to inform future decisions, not dissect mistakes of the past, which I think had sometimes been the motivation for them. We wanted to give better services to councillors so that they could report on behalf of their citizens, and we wanted sort of better integration with the back office. So what we did is we engaged some consultants first, who we asked to survey all of the staff, and they held some workshops and asked all of the services what they needed to become fully digital. Did they want SMS, better web forms, better web chat, better integrations? We identified shadow IT because a lot of people had started creating workarounds and using spreadsheets, and identified their reporting needs. So it's everything that we didn't do the first time. We had sessions with the leadership team to assess their appetite for risk, obtain digital ambition statements from the leadership team, from conservative to ambitious. Well, we offered them from conservative to ambitious and said, well, what do you want? Do you want to be conservative, or are you willing to make significant investment to get the most appropriate technology to deliver the best experience for staff? We held sessions to create word clouds, see what came to the top, all the things you would expect: customer friendly, intuitive, mobile first, cost effective, and arrived at a set of technology principles, again, which we shared with officers and members about how we wanted it to be liberating for our staff, to build more efficient digital processes and align our technology with the organisational needs and strategy. So the rest really now is about sort of looking at the market, deciding to procure through a framework rather than a tender because it was just quicker, and choosing a system. And in order to, again, get some buy-in from the rest of the organisation for the platform that we chose, We created a member or a councillor working party. It does slow things down a little bit, but it was worth it. We discussed our thoughts with members, and they offer some because there's a certain amount of cynicism after what they've been through the first time, and they offered some unexpected challenges like, will we be ripping this out again in 5 years' time, which got me thinking. But the point was they did offer challenge, and they acted as advocates with other councillors as well, and we obtained good buy-in from the members. And then we ran some product evaluation days. And for that, we invited users, contact centre agents, managers, senior leaders, council members. We created some scenarios that we sent to the suppliers. We produced a scoring sheet for the attendees. We set up the room, and we even provided lunch for them to keep the conversation going through the midday break. So we created these functional requirements that we sent to the suppliers about obviously the basics of we want CRM workflow, web forms, and so on, and some scenarios about how would a citizen report a fly tip, how would a platform support complex case management, for example. And then we ran the days. They were really successful. I think the tables that we set up for officers to evaluate pulled all their scores, and it was, we got a unanimous buy-in from all of the organisation for the chosen platform, and it generated quite a lot of buzz around the organisation as well, and an enthusiasm to adopt our chosen solutions rather than the issues that we had before, where people just weren't embracing it and constantly complaining about it. So to summarise the activities I thought were really useful in the second procurement was really we did a blueprint, we involved staff, involved members, did our research, clearly defined what we want, assessed the risk for appetite, created scenarios for the suppliers, kept staff informed, kept the enthusiasm and goodwill going, and we'd listened and learned from our mistakes. We were much more realistic on our project plans. Technical people's opinions carry more weight now. We can spin up processes and forms really quickly. And because again, we haven't got the silos, case managers, whatever process they happen to be working on, it can be the same system. There's no additional training for them. One of the downsides is that because we'd obviously 5-6 years ago lost 25% of our staff, it's almost like a one-way street. Another transformation is really difficult because we don't have the capacity, and that's compounded now as well by addressing the requirements of COVID payments and so on. But we can accommodate the requirements of the council to maintain performance. Because all we've been able to do through COVID is stretch out the project plan a little. So we've still got lots of good things we want to implement. We're not there yet. I want to have a unified work queue, and what we're hoping is that the efficiency gains that we generate with the new platform will allow our members to realise their ambition to build back better. They've taken stock of what's gone on through COVID. There's various new services they wanted to deliver out in the towns, particularly around enterprise and so on. So what we're hoping that the efficiencies that we generate with our new platform they're not designed to reduce headcount. They allow us to deal with the demands going forward, really. So that's where we are at the moment. We're still on that journey. Partway through our project plan for migrating our back office. We're implementing processes on our new workflow and case management platform, but it's a lot more comfortable than it was the first time around, shall we say. So that was my story, but if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to carry on.
So just one of the questions that we've got is around the approach that you took where you made everybody reapply for their jobs. So
Yeah.
that is quite a brave approach, quite controversial. I've seen it done in full departments. I've never seen it done in the whole council. How did that go down with the unions?
There was a fair amount of negotiation, but if I'm honest, because I live in Cornwall and I used to work for Cornwall Council, and before that I worked for a Cornish district, and so the branch that we represented officers, which I think is South West Unison, I've observed has been reasonably compliant in restructures and transformations. And so generally, although there's a lot of negotiation, the dramatic changes like this still seem to go through. And, I mean, the people that left were, left on, redundancy terms, if you like. It wasn't, and maybe that was enough to sway the unions. But yeah, I wasn't involved a great deal in that dialogue, but yeah, it did occur, but it didn't stop the process.
Are you willing to say who the suppliers were?
What, the first one or the...
Well, either, because obviously it's a kind of tailored to suppliers, isn't it? You've talked about around loads of consultants, underscoping the project, spending loads of money and still ending up not really getting what you want. And then obviously your experience with the other suppliers seems quite different. So yeah. I just wondered if you were willing to name them. That's maybe a bit naughty.
Yeah, I think it will be available in council papers anyway. So the supplier, it'll probably come as no surprise to a number of people. The first one was Civica. Okay. And the new suppliers that we've chosen are our friends Netcall, who I see are present here.
Netcall, I'm sure they'll be delighted at the name check.
Yeah, and the back office part is taken care of by Northgate. And there's real irony here because our original back office was Northgate. So we've migrated the data out into a Civica platform, and now we're migrating it back in. So you can see, of course, again, you can see the users are full of, oh well, we told you so now. But it's just a pragmatic thing to do. It was the right thing to do.
All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions, just to say thanks very much to Mike.